it's a bit tricky. So the thing is, of course, Trudeau is going to end in disgrace, as we saw. His legacy is all tattered. But when he goes, this problem will not end. Because, this Khalistanis have infiltrated the Canadian democratic institutions and completely undermined them. And this is like a mafia operation. So, when you have a mafia, of course, they have held the population hostage. So nobody dare speak against them. And also, the politicians are afraid of them. So to give you an example, when Mrs. Gandhi's float was taken out, nobody dared condemn it. The one, I think, the member of parliament, her name is Anita Anand, she tried speaking against it, and you have to see the harassment she got. On the other hand, when this low-life Khalistani, thug, he runs a small gurdwara, and, he was killed in all probability by a gangland hit. They got so many MPs to issue statements for, this Khalistani thug. And, this is how it runs. They have it's kind of like a Muslim brotherhood that they have entered. And I give you an example, Padmaja. So we know, of course, I'm no supporter of Operation, Blue Star. It was a blunt, carried very, consequences. So KPS Brar wrote a book, Blue Star, the True Story. So what the Khalistanis are doing, I am holding it. They are saying we are publishing a Punjabi version, right? And it is all lies in his name, in the name of KPS Brar. And they are saying, what I did was very bad. They were very great. We lost it. And how many people, Indian Army officers were killed? Indian Army soldiers were killed, 15,000. So the thing is, they lie shamelessly. They have no conscience. And this is the contempt they have for average Khalistani as well. This is their brain, that we will tell them any lies and, they would believe it. But these are just a criminal mafia has infiltrated the Canadian institutions. And to get them out would be very, very hard. So even I don't know the next prime minister, I don't know what he would be able to do. But Canada is going to be an antagonistic country and going down the drain itself for, I think, the coming years.
So clearly the Canadians are not in favor of this, just given the kind of coverage he has got, people saying that he has very few friends. Even in India during G20, I think the messaging was very, very clear. There has to be some huge importance and political compulsions which make Trudeau pass off these frankly seditionist protests as free speech. What are his compulsions, Punit Sahani?
So, ma'am, there are two things. So, A, they have terrorized the system. Now, I don't think, it's the, the lunatics running it. They also, you have to understand the woke virus. When they do something wrong, it's like communism. And the results are disastrous. They don't think, okay, we did something wrong and we should self-reflect. They think we have not done it enough. And we should actually do more of socialism or, more of this woke mindset. Then maybe we'll get the success. And he has basically destroyed the Canadian society by, doing this. And, to give you a point that how Sikhs are opposed to it, is the same Gurdwara where this referendum was happening just yesterday. I tell you, 25 years back, a long time back, they created such a nuisance there that, the Canadian armed police had to come with sniffer dogs and helicopter and also. And then and it was all for the control of the Gurdwara. They are violent elements. At that time, the Supreme Court got involved. What the hell is happening? And they were like, we are going to monitor the election. And when the Supreme Court of British Columbia monitored that election of that Guru Nanak Sikh temple, would you believe 40,000 people came out to vote in a small country like Canada 25 years ago? You cannot get this many people even today in Delhi to vote for a Gurdwara election. And what was the result of it? First to last, Khalistanis lost the election. And among the top losers was this father of Harjeet Sajjan that, again, Justin Trudeau foisted on, patriotic Sikhs, this thug Khalistanis. So they have no support. But what can you do when they go after your daughters or they go after your children? And, I don't want to make a spectacle of, I have to also suffer a little bit. But these people, I have always been making the case, and we don't have time here, but these are as nasty, as violent as jihadis and way more vile. So what do you do with these people if the state is compromised and doesn't have the will or the clarity to crack on it? Of course, everybody goes silent.
Is it also because of the sheer number of Sikhs? The fact that the float against Mrs. Gandhi was carried out in Brampton has a huge Sikh population. The same applies to Surrey as well, where yesterday, even as Mr. Trudeau was parked in New Delhi, the so-called referendum, and there were open threats given to the Prime Minister of India, to the External Affairs Minister, to the Home Minister of India. Is the population of radical Sikhs that large in Canada that the government thinks it's worthwhile to pander to this sentiment, Punit Sahani?
No, ma'am. I'll give you an example. So the most successful Sikh politician in Canada, and he went, I think, to the federal level, and he was the chief minister of a huge province. He was the most anti-Khalistani person, Ujjal Dosanjh. And again, he was beaten into an inch of his life. And he had to, for years, he had to live in police protection, sleep on the ground. And, he was lucky he had a wife who would support him. But, you read his book, what his children had to suffer through. So, the person who stood up and, was almost killed, he is the most successful Sikh in Canadian politics. And all these thugs, like Bas News and, their columnist is also like going after me, looking for my address and trying to dox me. They can't win a municipality election. Recently, their guy is Jaskaran Sandhu. I don't even want to take his name. He's so contemptible. He lost the municipality election. This is a mafia that I'm trying to explain. So you understand, you must have seen these movies, where the mafia controls everything. So, of course, if they have a fair election, they would lose. I give you another example as well.
Okay, so let me bring in Mr. Milewski on this as well. Mr. Milewski, common Canadians, like you said, are worried about what's going on. They think that a line has been crossed. Why aren't they doing something about it? Why aren't they seeking accountability from their government instead, which is pandering to this so-called separatist sentiment?
Well, the problem is that the public and the politicians are together making a giant mistake. They think it doesn't matter. They don't think about India very much. They don't think about the problems with the Khalistani insurgency because that's all very old news to Canadians. They think that, well, that's all about the Air India bombing years ago. It's history. This doesn't matter to us. Polls done quite recently this year show that 8 out of 10 Canadians know little or nothing about the Air India bombing, which was only the worst mass murder in Canadian history, the worst case of aviation terrorism in history until 9/11. And yet they don't consider it part of their lives. They don't, most of them live in communities where you see a lot of demonstrations against India, for example. It's localized in particular areas in Brampton, for example, in Ontario, in Surrey in British Columbia, and in a few federal districts, which tend to influence a lot how the federal elections turn out in Canada, but nevertheless don't seem to form a great part of the consciousness of the average Canadian. They simply dismiss this as unimportant. Now, I think that what's happened in India, then this is the second trip to India, which has ended badly for Prime Minister Trudeau. The last one, you'll recall, in 2018, ended with the embarrassment of a convicted Khalistani terrorist being invited to a glittering reception for Mr. Trudeau. This terrorist was invited by the Canadian High Commissioner to a reception in New Delhi. And of course, that went very badly. The Indians were furious, and quite rightly, and the gentleman was swiftly disinvited, but it was too late. It was a fiasco. This one has ended badly as well. And maybe the embarrassment, one can only hope, will have an impact on the average Canadian, who will now look at this and say, something's going badly wrong in our relations with India. And most people do realize, I think, that India is no longer some backwater off on the other side of the world. India is part of all of our lives and is going to occupy a bigger and bigger part in international affairs and certainly in Canada's hopes for expanding trade. Next time, I think what's going to be happening as Canada tries to pursue a free trade agreement with India is that Indian ministers are going to say, oh, I can't see you on that day. I'm terribly busy. Awfully sorry. Oh, we're going to be knocking on doors and finding those doors closed to us unless we address in short order the failure of the Canadian body politic to respond to Khalistani provocations by, for example, amending legislation to make sure that the glorification of terrorism is a criminal offense, as it has been, for example, in Britain for 17 years now. They've moved with the times. Canada hasn't. It's not a criminal offense. And so every time Canadian ministers encounter an Indian minister, the Indian counterpart bangs the table and says, why don't you lock these people up? Why aren't you doing something about it? And the Canadian says, freedom of speech, freedom of speech. It's not a good enough answer. We believe in freedom of speech. Yes, we should preserve it.
Exactly.
Yes,
so that's the question I wanted to come to next, Mr. Milewski.
There has to be a line. Yes.
There were two countries to whom we posed the same question. There was Mr. Trudeau and there was Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak said unequivocally, we condemn this, we are going to act on this. What was the reason that despite the kind of language that India used, not only did he try to hide behind free speech, but on the very day that he was sitting in Delhi, we had a referendum being carried out in Surrey?
Well, the referendum doesn't breach Canadian law. The referendum is people getting together to vote on an issue that they chose to vote on. And it's very hard to see how Canadians could make that illegal. I know that it's illegal in India. We have a different legal system, and it's perfectly legal to go through the streets shouting Khalistanis Zindabad. It's perfectly legal to say, let's vote on whether we think that Khalistan should be a free and independent Sikh nation. But the problem is, what about when they do cross the line into the open incitement of terrorism and violence, when they paint targets on the backs of Indian diplomats, as they certainly did with these killer posters, most recently in the wake of the assassination, the gangland killing of Mr. Najjar in Surrey, British Columbia? What about that? What about the incitement to violence against Indian diplomats and the celebration of terrorism represented by the tableau of Indira Gandhi's assassination, paraded through the streets of Brampton, Ontario, which is kind of Canada's little Punjab, if you will. The failure of Canada to deal with those provocations is the issue. Remember that Rishi Sunak is a hero in India now because of what he said, that there's no place for extremism in Britain. Well, there is actually, but they draw the line very clearly, and if you cross it, you are dealt with. That's the difference. There are certainly extremists operating in Britain, but at least rhetorically, the Prime Minister of Britain has stepped up and says, we agree with you about where the line should not be crossed. And the Canadian Prime Minister so far has not done that. They don't get it. The present government of Canada has still not shown that it gets what the problem is, that the people that they rely upon to vote Liberal at federal elections, they're going too far, and they have to be stopped.
Well, that's quite stunning.